In this video, we're going to be going over one counter for every single hero in Overwatch 2. So if you're really struggling trying to climb and you keep going up against the same heroes again and again, this is the perfect video for you. But if you enjoy my content, smash that subscribe button. And for private coaching and to join the Discord, links will be in the description down below. So you might be wondering what this chart is. And it's definitely not something that I made. It's probably the most atrocious counters chart that I have ever seen. And basically, it was written by Rock Paper Shotgun. Definitely don't go to their website. And yeah, he broke down counters in this game and just filled it in. Counters in Overwatch. And if we just look through some of these counters, we see some really, really strange things. Junkrat counters D.Va. Absolutely freaking not. We go down the list and we look at, I don't even know. Let's see. Widowmaker has a Reinhardt counter? Like, no. Also, absolutely not. There's a lot of these characters that make no sense. So, I'm going to briefly go through each one and then give you like a real suggestion for a character that counters and why. And I'm also going to talk about why some of these counters don't make sense, don't work, and you shouldn't be thinking about the game this way. Now, real quickly, let's go over D.Va and a couple of things I want to talk about. Roadhog and Junkrat, if you were to think about why these characters don't counter D.Va, what would you think about? Now, let's go to that Roadhog example. And the reason that Roadhog is probably on this list, I guess, is that Roadhog can hook a D.Va. And against a bad D.Va, you can demech her. But let me tell you the reality of the situation playing a Roadhog against a good D.Va. You hook someone, you're gonna one-tap them, and D.Va just blocks it, and now you don't kill them. And hitting a hook is not something that's easy, especially against squishy targets. When you hit that godly hook, you want to get rewarded for it, but you're not getting rewarded for it because D.Va could shut you down. And if you have ever played Hog up against an Ana and you hooked her, which is your hard counter, very, very good character against Hog, and you're going to kill your hard counter because you hit your skill shot, you got her, but she wasn't expecting it, only for it to get DM'd, you to get slept and naded and murdered, and, you know, your wife leaves you. All of it happened in a span of a moment. And, yeah, no. Junkrat, I mean, come on, man. Come on. D.Va just eats every single bit of Junkrat's value. I mean, sure, Tyre is decent against the D.Va because she can't really break it. But everything that Junkrat wants to do, D.Va can stop. She beats him in the 1v1. If she just flies at him, he's dead. In addition to that, he wants to put pressure out on space, right? Deny space. D.Va protects her team and prevents Junkrat from doing any damage while they're transversing through this open space. D.Va is a Junkrat hard counter. There you go. That's one in advance. I know we're not going in order, but this is going to be a long-ass video, so prepare. Now, the interesting thing here is the Sombruh and Zarya example. Sombruh is a character that actually counters, at least soft counters, a ton of characters in the game. Because every character wants to use their abilities. It's very hard to cancel hack, and if you get hacked, you can't do anything. So that is a counter. And it's teetering between soft counter and hard counter for the majority of the cast. Now, let me really quickly define the difference between a soft and a hard counter. A soft counter is something that denies one of the basic playstyles your character wants to do, right? It denies something that your character wants to accomplish. You can play around soft counters, but you can't play directly into the thing that is soft countering you. Like, as an example, if you're playing a Pharah, there are many hit scans that are closer to soft counters than hard counters. A character like Widowmaker might be closer to a hard counter because you can't occupy any space within her line of sight. Especially if it's a good Widowmaker, she's just going to kill you. But against characters like Soldier, if you play far outside his effective range, really far away spamming, he's not actually shutting you down. So there's a difference here, and it's also like a spectrum between hard and soft counters. It's not like this character just completely shuts you down and this character doesn't shut you down at all. Coming full circle here to say that Sombruh is a character that soft counters the majority of the cast, but hard counters a couple of characters on the cast. Now, is D.Va one of those characters she hard counters? No, because disabling D.Va for a couple of seconds is not actually, it's not even a couple of seconds. It's like 1.75 seconds. It's going to be 1.25 seconds, but that's not enough to actually deny what D.Va can do. And it doesn't kill her instantly. It's not going to ruin her. Now, there are characters that she does hard counter, but we'll get to that in a bit. I would say that Sombruh is a soft D.Va counter, and I'll extrapolate more on that in the future. Now, Zarya is a character that I would say is actually a D.Va counter. counter. We got one. We got an actual counter. But here's the thing about the Zarya D.Va matchup. You can still play D.Va against a Zarya. And you might be like, what? I don't have to swap? No, you don't always have to swap up against a Zarya. This is why counters need to be thought of in the scope of an entire 5v5, not just a 1v1. Because sure, if you're locked in a cage, D.Va versus Zarya, the Zarya is going to just destroy you. You can't do anything to her. You can't stop her damage if she's just beaming you. And yes, you can eat her grav, but she can definitely play around that. That being said, if you're playing a D.Va in a dive composition, you can avoid the Zarya, dive over her, dive the squishies, dive the DPS, prevent their value, save your team. You don't ever have to actually fight that D.Va directly. In a spam composition, you can block a ton of damage. You can play the high ground. Zarya's really bad at playing the high ground. You could go on the enemy squishies. You could protect your team. So you can play D.Va only towards her strengths. The only way that you actually countered in this matchup is if you're forced to brawl with the Zarya. You're forced to fight her on her turf. She's pushing and you have to fight down on her. But there are ways to still play D.Va even into that. So while I would say she is a hard counter, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to swap and you will always get shut down. I wouldn't say she's like the hardest counter. And the hardest counter would be like a character where if that character exists, I can't even play the game. And there's only a couple of those. So I want to make that clear. Now, in essence of time, I'm going to go through the rest of this list pretty quickly. And I'm going to try to go in order left down like this so that you actually get to, you know, follow along and you could skip to whatever character you want to see if you really want to know what counters them. And I really already made my big points about counters in general. Now, moving on to Doomfist. Now, before we move on about Doomfist, Doomfist is very low in power level right now. So there's characters that won't necessarily counter him, but that doesn't mean he's good against those characters because of his low power level in the game. And that's something that you also need to understand, is that a character could be hypothetically countered by something on paper, but if its power level is high enough, it won't necessarily matter. Now, as the best example to this, let's take like Genji and Brig from Overwatch 1, where Overwatch 1 Brig heavily countered Genji, but there was a small time period where they upped Genji's damage enough to where he could go in and one-tap people, even through armor, very quickly and dash away. So Genji was powerful enough to even up against his counter, he still could succeed because that's how powerful his ceiling was. Only for that small window of time. But that's something that you need to think about. Not only what counters what, but also the power level of the character in like the open meta. Reaper definitely doesn't counter Doom. Genji doesn't definitely counter Doom. Pharah and Echo, they're okay because they can fly and they can like spam from above, and Doomfist can't stop that. But that's still another example of the like Zarya D.Va example where Doomfist does not have to care about the Pharah or the freaking Echo. If there's another tank that he can displace, another DPS he could dive on, another squishy he can displace and move and dive on, that's who he could focus on, and he creates space for his DPS to potentially deal with the Pharah or the Echo. So he doesn't have to deal with them directly, and he also just has to avoid them and not let them just get kills on him for free, which a Doomfist can definitely do, especially if they're skilled. Do they actually really hard counter this character? Not really in the traditional sense, because a Doomfist is not going to be trying to fight a Pharah. He's not just looking at this Pharah. He's not doing some crazy get quaked on bounce to try to kill this Pharah. He's literally doing other things on the battlefield, and he's just playing around her presence. I will say, if I were to give you one example of an actual counter to Doom, Sombruh. Sombruh just hacks him. And it's very frustrating because you could be mid-combo, mid-movement, whatever the case may be, and you get hacked, and then you're kind of a cold turkey. CC, like Rock, Hook, and Sleep are also very good against him. Now, he has other things that he can do against those characters' kit, but from an ability standpoint, those would be counters to Doom in his current state. Next up, let's talk about Junker Queen. And they give a couple of suggestions, which are just completely random. Junker Queen right now is suffering from a power levels perspective, especially compared to some of the other tanks in the game. But if I were to give you one true counter to Junker Queen, I would actually say Kiriko. And that's because her ultimate can just get completely neutralized by Kiriko's ability. Not to mention, Junker Queen is gonna have a hard time dealing with a Kiriko that's on an alternate angle. Not a big deal, but it's mainly just the fact that you can cleanse her ultimate is a huge deal, and Kiriko can do that. So yeah, Kiriko is gonna counter a couple of characters on this list, spoiler alert. Now we're moving on to Orisa, and you see that Monkey is on there, and some of you are gonna laugh at that, but in a way, Monkey can counter Orisa. And you might be like, what the hell hell? How is a monkey countering Orisa? Well, Orisa wants to brawl, get up close and personal, and really fight on the front line together. What monkey wants to do is dive the back line and surgically attack certain weaknesses in a composition. And he can do that up against the Orisa comps because he can jump past the Orisa and avoid her altogether, play keep away, and like if the Orisa's standing on the front line and you as monkey jump into the enemy backline as your Genji and Tracer go and you kill someone right away, that Orisa can't do anything to stop that, and you got your value. I'm not saying that Winston is a true Orisa counter. I'm just saying that this is not like completely, you know, out of the park mental like the Junkrat example for Diva. Like a true Orisa counter, characters that can actually kill her when she uses her utility. I say a character like Echo is very good against Orisa, but honestly, Orisa kind of suffers from a power level perspective right now, where generally she's weaker than characters like Zarya. Zarya can just brawl her on the front line, and I would say like the best actual counter to her right now is probably a Zarya. Moving on to Reinhardt. Reinhardt, they say he's countered by Reaper, Bastion, Pharah, and Junkrat. And these are all things that are going to break Reinhardt's shield, which is another like really weird way to think about Rein because, yeah, I mean, that's just not it. Rein's a character that wants to brawl, right? He's a character that wants to get on the front line, swing his hammer, and brawl. And while things that can break his shield are decently fine, that isn't really the end goal when you're trying to beat a Rein. Like, to beat a Rein should not really be, I'm gonna break his shield and then we can win. Absolutely not. That's not really what actually is good against Rein. What I would say is characters that are best against Rein is characters that can actually play both on the front line when they need to help their team, but also make plays on the enemy back line, and Rein can't do anything to stop them. A really notable part of this is that Rein can't peel. A character like Sojourn is actually really great against Reinhardt, right? He can poke on the front shield, help his team, put pressure on that Rein, because Rein definitely can't push in if he has no shield, right? He could get hit by CC, but he also could just come on top of you and swing on you if you have no abilities or if he speeds on top of you. But a Sojourn can build that charge off that Rein shield and then go for these one taps. And then there's a lot of characters that are generally decent against Rein because they just don't care about what Rein is doing. A character like Genji, hypothetically, can reflect his fire strike, can go push past the Reinhardt and go deal with the back line. I wouldn't say that Genji counters Rein though. There's not a lot of characters that just counter Rein straight up. Shield breaking is one type of play, but it matters more about what your overall strategy is, because if you're playing like a dive composition with the freaking Junkrat, like your entire team is dive, but you're a Junkrat, you're gonna break his shield. But guess what? Your team is not trying to break his shield. Your team is trying to avoid the Rein and kill their back line, and you're sitting there trying to break this damn Rein shield, and it's gonna do nothing. Like, it's gonna do absolutely nothing. So it's really important that you don't just think about what your character can do, but how does it play into the composition that you're playing. Shield break could be good if you actually have a means to capitalize on it once the shield is broken. Some sort of spam. Maybe you have a Zen, maybe you have a Hanzo, maybe you have a lot of damage going through. Then it's like, okay, breaking a shield actually is worth something. Now, next up, we gotta talk about Roadhog, and they actually did get 2 counters right for Roadhog. They got Zarya, which she has 2 bubbles now. She can bubble off your hooks. Very frustrating, but she can completely shut down your predominant way to get value. And then Ana can not only sleep you, but nade you. So both these characters are really, really great at countering Roadhog. I would say they're pretty close to a true hard counter. However, that doesn't mean you can't play Roadhog against them. The reason that you can is with your skill. First off, you have a lot of skill expression with Hog, right? So you could still get kills and picks when the Zarya is not paying attention to you. It also relies on how good that Zarya is. If the Zarya isn't actually bubbling off your hooks, then you're just gonna get actual kills on the table. So I would say as Zaryas get better, the counter becomes harder and harder, right? The Zarya gets better and better at countering the Hog, but as skill gets worse and worse, you can still find gaps in that Zarya. With the Ana example, Ana definitely is very annoying. A good Ana is super annoying to play against, but if you have a Kiriko on your team, all of a sudden you don't even care because they can just cleanse you and you can get right out of there. So it's interesting because you can have an Ana counter that actually counters her counter. It's kind of fun in that way, but yeah, very annoying from an Ana's perspective as someone who has slept a lot of Hogs and they just get woken up. Widow, absolutely not. Hog doesn't care about Widow at all. And then Reaper, it's not the counter that you think it is. While Roadhog is a big target, Roadhog can still hook one tap you if you're Reaper. He can also run away from you and he can distance himself from you. I'm not saying that Reaper is bad in the matchup, but Roadhog isn't bad either. It's kind of like a wash. No counter here. Next up, let's talk about Sigma. And we have Rein and Orisa as counters against Sigma, which is not really a great way to think about what makes Sigma strong or what Sigma wants to do. Sure, if those characters are on top of you as Sigma in that 1v1 brawl we talked about, that's bad news. It's not good. Sigma wants to distance himself, right? So like if Orion is here, you're here. As the Orion pushes up, you want to back and you keep it backing. Once the Ryan has no shield and you whittled him down and you did damage to you whittled down his resources, you can hit him with a rock. You can focus him as a team and you're giving space and then taking space with your shield as well, but you're not trying to be on top of an Orisa or a Ryan. And if you play like that, these characters aren't hard countering you. Like characters that want to get in their effective range while you want to maintain your distancing. Sure, if you don't have a speed boost or any way to get out and the Ryan speeds on top of you, then yeah, he's countering you in that instance. But in general, no. Now, there's also like Genji, like no. No, it does, in no world is Genji a counter to Sigma. He can't even deflect the damn rock, man. Come on. Next up, we got to talk about Winston. Countered by Roadhog, I would say sure. Winston can definitely play around a Roadhog, but a good Roadhog can hit hooks on him. I would say, sure, slight counter. Ana, absolutely not. You want to dive in Ana. Junkrat, I would say that a Junkrat is actually pretty annoying to deal with as a Winston because he can mind you away. But that's in the isolated matchup. He can always just dive something else, deal with the Junkrat later, and then that space denial that Junkrat does. A Junkrat has to be pretty skilled to know how to adjust where he's spamming for a dive. You want to like spam the space that your team's on, prevent that Winston from actually jumping on your team. So it's pretty tricky. And then Moira, I mean, Moira can run away from a Winston. She's a hard target to dive, but to say that she would counter a Winston, no, she doesn't counter a Winston. For Sigma, a character that is really good against a Sigma is, surprise, surprise, Zarya. And for Winston, characters that are decent against Winston, actually right now is D.Va. D.Va's pretty good against Winston. She can hit him and boop him down. She does similar things to Winston, but she is pretty good up against him. That being said, in pro play, Winston is seeing more play than D.Va because Winston aids his team better. Bubble is a more powerful cooldown. Winston plays better with the team. So it doesn't really matter that D.Va is pretty good in the head-to-head with the Winston because that's just not how it's going to play out like 90% of the time. Now, to talk about Hammond, I'm not going to talk about anything besides Sombruh. Yes, Sombruh hard counters Hammond. I would say that that's probably the biggest hard counter in the game is Sombruh versus Hammond. That is one of the matchups that I like the least in Overwatch because it feels like Wrecking Ball has almost no counterplay to a Sombruh that just wants to spend her entire game ruining his life. Very annoying from the Wrecking Ball's point of view, but yeah, it is what it is. It's definitely frustrating. Moving on to Zarya. Now, Zarya is actually countered by Winston. Winston's predominant strategy right now, diving the back line, surgically entering the team, bubbling off to create space. These things are all good against Zarya. And while Zarya has some of the highest power level as a tank right now, Winston is a character that is primed to not only capitalize on that by pretty much not fighting Zarya in the way she wants to be fought, right? Brawling on the front line, but she's also really good. But Winston is also good with characters that are also good at ignoring Zarya. You know, characters like Genji, Tracer, Sojourn. These characters are good at avoiding Zarya's effective range. They're also good at following up a Winston's damage by either taking off angles or diving with him. So yeah. Next up, let's talk about Ashe. And yeah, I would say Widowmaker and Hanzo are actually good Ashe counters if you're good, but it's closer to a skill matchup than it is a counter. Although Widowmaker definitely, and Widowmaker and Hanzo both have an advantage in those matchups because they can both one-shot, headshot the Ashe, but the Ashe needs that pocket. If the Ashe has that pocket, then it's closer to kind of even, right? Tracer? Hell no. What? No, Ashe can one-shot, headshot you. You can still play around her as a Tracer, but it's a skill matchup. It's not a counter matchup. And then Ryan, no. What? You can dynamite over his shield, can break his shield, you can just shoot his backline. No, definitely not. Next up, we got to talk about Bastion. Roadhog is okay. Yeah, I would say it's fine. Junkrat, not really. Ana is decent. You could sleep. But once again, these are like not hard counters. I would say that Reaper is pretty good, but if a Bastion just spaces properly from you, it's still not going to be the greatest. I would say characters that can abuse the fact that you have a big freaking hitbox or deny your value. So characters like D.Va can deny your value. Genji can abuse you by just running at you and shurikening you and deflecting your freaking turret form. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say most. Next up, we gotta talk about Cassidy, and forget the counters that he's talking about. Widowmaker, I mean, yeah, if you're trying to fight her outside of your effective range, then you're gonna be very poor in that matchup, but Cassidy should just not try to take those duels. Winston, he's okay against Cassidy. Cassidy has low mobility, so the style of dive that wants to go after a Cassidy is pretty strong against him. I would say that D.Va is better for that slot. She's just really good at shutting him down. And then characters like Baptiste, I don't even know why that's there. That makes no sense. And then Tracer, I would say that that's closer to a skill matchup, even though I think Tracer has the advantage. Genji is better though at diving cast. I would say he is pretty favored in that matchup. Next up, we got to talk about Echo. Echo, while these characters are all decent against an Echo, I would say that Echo is a character that kind of struggles up against a character like Soldier, someone that is able to do a lot of damage to her when she's trying to go for plays and doesn't necessarily care about what she is doing as much. Overall though, hit scans are pretty good against an Echo, but an Echo can definitely play around them. Wouldn't say that she is countered by them. She is maybe soft countered at the very most. Next up, we got to talk about Genji, and I would say that some of these characters, yeah, no. So Pharah, no, doesn't counter Genji. Brig doesn't counter Genji anymore. He can just go after her and dash her through the shield, combo her. She's not a really great counter against Genji. While Pharah, he can't deal damage to her very easily. He can avoid her. It's kind of going back to that Doomfist example where he just does different things on the battlefield. And sometimes he can go for that Pharah. Sometimes he can kill her. When she's caught in barrage, he can deflect the damage back to her. When she is retreating back to her team, he can go and finish her off. Yeah, the matchup is not like one counters the other. Most of the time, they're doing different things on the battlefield. Zarya is a character that can like soft counter Genji. She can bubble off his blades, bubble off his dive targets, beam him down through deflect. But once again, a Genji can play around those things. He can go and surgically find targets on the battlefield while the D.Va or while the Zarya is occupied. So probably a soft counter is what that is closer to. And then Ana, no. I mean, it's probably like Genji soft counters Ana, but it also is a skill matchup where Ana has capability to win that. Not against a great Genji. I mean, like a great Genji that gets the jump on you, you're gonna lose, but you can still have a ton of skill expression in the matchup, whether you're sleeping his targets or hitting consistent shots, or sleeping his blade, hitting consistent shots. You understand the drill. Next up, let's talk about Hanzo. And Widowmaker is definitely not a Hanzo counter. Hanzo actually soft counters Widowmaker because he has his own form of sights and can still one-shot her from range. But characters that want to dive on top of the Hanzo are good. I would say, once again, D.Va is a little bit better than Winston, although Winston is fine up against the Hanzo. And then Genji is very good against the Hanzo. Just characters that want to jump on top of him. He doesn't have a crazy amount of mobility. He can't get out of there very easily, so he's a pretty easy dive target. Next up, let's talk about Junkrat. And I would say that out of these, no. None of these. Actually, no, that's actually not true. No, Pharah is actually good against Junkrat. Characters that fly, this is a legitimate problem for Junkrat because he doesn't deny their space. It's not really just because he can't kill them, but he doesn't actually deny any of the space that they are holding. So yeah, like a character like Pharah, like a Pharah Mercy is a nightmare to deal with for a Junkrat. Characters like Widowmaker, you can't really do anything to her. She can't really do a ton to you, but if you fly through open space, she could kill you and she can kill your tires. So another character that she's probably, I mean, it's situational. It's just situational. And then characters that can punish him for having this fixed movement. Even characters like Hanzo, I would say soft counter Junkrat because they could take weird angles on him. They could punish him for having fixed movement, and they slightly outrange him. Moving on, let's talk about Mei. I would say that none of these characters truly counter Mei. Sombruh's pretty decent up against the Mei. Pharah is also decent, although a good Mei can definitely contest a Pharah, hit consistent body shots with that icicle. But if it's a Pharah Mercy, good freaking luck. But that's like a 2-character combo. Not really fair. The hack is very annoying if you're trying to go into ice block. Ultimately though, Mei's like also weak against things that can one-tap her. Characters like Sojourn, characters like Hanzo. These characters are actually pretty good against Mei because her time to kill is still slow. And like if you're a Mei running at a Hanzo and a Hanzo hits a headshot on you, or Sojourn hits a railgun headshot on you, I mean, yeah. So those are harder counters than many of these ones. Pharah, so they have Widowmaker, yes. Hanzo, no. Sojourn, I mean, you have to hit those rail shots if you can, sure. Soldier, yes. I mean, hit scans are really what is good against her, but one of the best counters up against her is also D.Va. D.Va's very good at denying a lot of her spam. Even if a Pharah's playing really well, really far away, spamming rockets from afar, a D.Va can deny a ton of that value and keep her team alive. As a D.Va, you don't necessarily want to try to eat everything, but you want to eat enough to where none of those rockets actually kill anybody. So you could eat a rocket, let one hit. Eat a rocket, let one hit. That's just a hypothetical. Of course, if your team is low, you got to eat as much as you can. Next up, we got to talk about Reaper. And Reaper's a character that he doesn't necessarily get countered by a lot of these characters. Once again, we're entering that fly situation. The Pharah flies and the Reaper can't kill it, so obviously that character counters. That's not really how it works. The Reaper's gonna go do other things on the battlefield. He's gonna go do his own thing. He's gonna get value, and you're gonna be a Pharah just, you know, sitting around. I mean, the Pharah's probably gonna go do her own thing too. In the 1v1, sure, but this game is not a 1v1. It's never gonna be a true 1v1, and that's just not how you should think about matchups. I would say that one of the best characters up against a Reaper would be like Hanzo, right? He can find where that Reaper is. Reapers like to play corners and hide. You can find where they are. You can one-tap them. That's like a great example. Characters like D.Va are decent against a Reaper because you could deny his Death Blossom or his plays, force him to fade away. Those are the characters that I would say counter him the most. Next up, we got to talk about Sojourn. Sojourn is definitely, I mean, from a power perspective, Sojourn has no counters right now. It is what it is. She just doesn't have a counter right now. And she's not getting nerfed, so she's not going to have a counter. She's a character that is incredibly powerful. She has mobility. She has a one-shot capability. She's good at playing the front line, poking because it builds a railgun. She's good at making plays, and she can't be countered by pretty much anything in the roster. So yeah, Sojourn doesn't have a counter. Good stuff. I would say she has no counter. I mean, sure, there's characters that can fight her and have decent matchups against her. Characters like Genji are good at fighting her in close range and things like that, but nothing that is a actual counter. There are some skill matchups and some matchups that are slightly favored up against her in a 1v1. In her place in a 5v5, she has no counter. Soldier 76. Soldier has not a crazy amount of true weaknesses. He has a slight power level weakness where compared to some of the other options like Sojourn, he falls flat because he doesn't have the ability to make that much impact with like one taps. But so from a power level point of view, he's kind of weak, but from a countering point of view, there's not a lot of characters that just true counter Soldier. I think he has good game against the majority of DPS in a 1v1. Some characters he doesn't want to fight in their range. You know, he doesn't want to fight up close against a Reaper or a Junkrat. He doesn't want to fight from far away up against a Widow or a Hanzo, but he can control those engagements. If I were to say that there's any character that is really good against Soldier, I mean, maybe D.Va is pretty decent against Soldier. D.Va, I mean, he can definitely run away if he wants to, and if the D.Va doesn't actually hit him with anything, he can use his heal station and burst her down. So, yeah, I mean, Soldier doesn't really have any true counters, in my opinion. That doesn't mean he's like the best character in the world, because I think his power level is low enough to where it's not like he just stomps on characters either. He's kind of like a neutral. Next up, we got to talk about Sombruh. Sombruh is countered, I would say, most by characters that don't really care about her hack that much, and characters that are capable of making her respect them. So like Hanzo's actually a decent counter up against the Sombruh because he can not only find her, but if she sticks around too long, he can also kill her. So yeah, I would say that. I would actually say that Tracer is pretty good up against the Sombruh because he can chase her down, he can duel her, he can cancel her hack. She could start a hack, he could blink away, or she could blink away. I think that that's more of a skill matchup though, and also like Sombruh doesn't really have like, I don't think, any hard counters in the game. I think Hanzo's probably the best character up against her, but even that is still a skill matchup. Like, not a skill from Sombrah's side, but from Hanzo's side. He still has to be able to hit the shot to punish her. And if you're not hitting your shots, then you ain't countering anything. Next up, we got to talk about Symmetra. I would say that Symmetra is actually countered by Pharah, a character that wants to play with her team, isn't trying to go for her own thing, and then Pharah can kind of really mess with her turrets and mess with her strategy. And I really want you to notice the difference here. When I talk about characters that can avoid their counter and go do their own thing, or avoid a character that they can't do anything about, so like Genji can avoid a Pharah and go do his own thing, so he's not countered by her. Reaper can avoid a Pharah and go do his own thing, get impact even regardless of her existence. But a Symmetra has a problem doing that. It's harder for her to do her base strategy, whether she's trying to teleport her team in, make teleport plays, set up turrets, fight with her team, because she doesn't really want to just go flank and do her own thing. That's going to be a lot harder up against a Pharah. So in that case, it's more of a hard counter, as opposed to the other characters that don't really care as much. They can still do their predominant power strategy even if the Pharah is in play. Next up, we got to talk about Torb. Torb's a character that I would say I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things that are like generally good against Torb from a power level perspective. He has a huge hitbox and he's easy to dink with characters that can headshot him. That being said, I don't necessarily think that they hard counter Torb. And as far as characters that actually like true counter Torb, I would say like Sigma's pretty good at like dealing with this turret and like blocking off his value, but it's not like a hard counter. I don't think there's any characters that like truly hard counter Torb in the way that you think that they do. But that doesn't mean that, once again, it doesn't mean that Torb is like amazing. It's just like he has a lot of characters that have decent game against him across the board, because of just the size of his hitbox, and then like the amount of value he gets per second might not be the highest. He gets like a slow amount of value over the course of a round, as opposed to like spikes of value that some of these other DPS can get, like Sojourn, for instance, that can get like definitive value on the table, really impactful value out of nowhere, while Torb just kind of wants to like not be dealt with for a very long period of time and just like slowly but surely get value over the course of a long fight. Doesn't always work that way, right? Next up, we got to talk about Tracer. Tracer's definitely not countered by Winston. I would say that Tracer's actually favored in that matchup. She can just avoid the matchup if she doesn't want to fight it. Also, Brig, another character that this is super outdated knowledge, where Brig doesn't really counter Tracer like hardly at all. I mean, a Tracer doesn't really care about Brig. I would say that Brig doesn't counter much of anything anymore. Pharah, another example of a character where Tracer just can ignore. And unlike the Reaper and Genji example, Tracer can actually kill the Pharah. If she's on the high ground, if the Pharah is caught lacking, Tracer can kill that Pharah. So I would say that Tracer is actually decent to play against a Pharah, not to like shut her down or anything, but just to be doing your own thing, put pressure on the Mercy, put pressure on different characters on the map, and then if the Pharah's caught lacking, you can finish her off. I would say that Torb is pretty annoying to play against, though, as a Tracer, right? The turret is just annoying. You can't really break the turret. You got to get your team to break the turret, and that's just annoying because you try to go for a flank, you're getting shot by the turret. Definitely annoying. Overall, though, Tracer is kind of in a weird situation where I think the majority of the matchups or the bad matchups in the game for her or the things that can contest her in the game are pretty much all skill matchups. Almost all of them are skill matchups. Characters that have a ton of game against her are characters that can one-tap her or have some sort of combo, like Cassidy, Hanzo. Soldier's good against her. Freaking Ashe can one-tap her. Mei can one-tap her. Kiriko can hit her in the head and melee her. Ana can sleep her. Widow can one-tap her. Like, Roadhog can hook her. I mean, every character in the game has something up against a Tracer, but you can outplay all those things. So it's like skill matchup. No hard counters here. Next up, we got to talk about Widowmaker, and I think that Widowmaker has characters that definitely have game against her. Not like Reinhardt, definitely not. But characters that want to dive her are annoying to deal with. Diva, Winston. Those characters are a little bit easier to play around, though, than Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball being like one of the hardest counters to Widow because you can't kill him. You literally have to play keep away with this guy. If your team doesn't support you, help you, or you don't get value as the Wrecking Ball comes in and then your team like wins the fight, the Wrecking Ball is just going to follow you around the map forever and you're just going to do nothing. So that is what I would consider a hard counter. Doesn't mean you can't win the game with it. If their tank is just wasting his time on one DPS the entire game while your Zarya kills his entire team, who cares? But yeah, I would say that. And then also like a better Widow. So that always counters you. Hanzo's pretty good against you. A little bit of a skill matchup, but it's a little easier on the Hanzo side. Sojourn is also a character that is really annoying now because she can fly around the corner with max charge and dink you. So yeah, but also a skill matchup. So yeah. Next up, let's talk about Ana, and forget all of those. Forget every single one of them. I've been playing a lot of Ana recently, and I'm going to tell you right now that there is one counter to Ana that makes you want to freaking die, and it's Kiriko. She is the most annoying character on the planet to play against. It's so annoying. If you can't tell that I'm a little bit salty, it's because I'm a little bit salty. If I sound a little bit salty, it's because I'm salty. Because yeah, you can nade someone and it gets cleansed. You can sleep someone and it gets cleansed. Realistically, you have to... I mean, there are some situations where Kiriko is just going to roll you when you kind of have to hope. As an example, I want to tell you something that happened to me in one of my games the other day. A Genji came at me with a Nano Blade. And guess what? I'm a G. I'm sick. I sleep him. The Kiriko teleports on him and cleanses him. And he kills me. What the heck? You know how hard it is to hit a sleep on a Nano Blade Genji that is coming at you a million miles an hour? It's hard. It's hard. And then the Kiriko is just like, nah. So yeah, definitely a very hard counter. Kiriko is. So yeah. Next up, we got to talk about Baptiste. And Baptiste is a character where I don't think he really has like any true counters. His abilities can't really be shut down all that easily. Of course, he could definitely get dove, but he has game in a lot of those matchups. Some matchups he doesn't want to jump as much. You know, against the Genji, he's inclined to jump, but against the Hanzo, he could get dinked if he jumps. These are some examples. I would say that Bap doesn't have a true hard counter, though. I think Bap is generally good against a lot of things, and there's a lot of skill matchups involved, and then there's a ton of matchups where he's not really directly fighting that character, right? His team is, and he's enabling them, but he's not like trying to actively take a 1v1 with a lot of DPS characters. Like, he's gonna shoot when he can, and he does, but he's not like trying to duel them all. Next up, we gotta talk about Brig. Brig's a character that she gets countered. She doesn't really have any true like hard counters. I would say that what she's strong at is protecting. Like, that's what Brig is the best at. If you are playing in a composition where you have someone worth protecting, then Brig can be good. And you just stay near that person and you make sure that person does not die. Whether it's an Ana, whether it's a Cass, whether it's a Junkrat, I don't care. You are protecting them. You are get down Mr. President. That's what you are. But like generally, Brig is not a character that just has like amazing matchups with anybody across the board. She has a role and a goal. And outside of that, like, she's not going to be able to, like, kill a Pharah, right? She's not going to do anything to a Pharah, right? So a Pharah is coming after her, she can't do anything. But if she's protecting a Cassidy, then, yeah, they can deal with the Pharah together. So it's a little bit situational depending on who she's protecting. And that's when you pick Brig, you need to think about who in my comp is worth protecting. Are they good enough to be worth protecting? Is the character, like, a character that will get value if I protect? Like, for instance, if you're playing Brig and you have a Genji, a Tracer, and a Lucio, and a Wrecking Ball, who are you protecting in that composition? You're not protecting anybody. You are the one that is just there. Now, you are the dive target. You are the one that can't run away. You are the one that can't do anything. Everyone's going to kill you. Because you're not protecting anything. Nothing is getting value from your existence. That's what you should be thinking about. Not like who counters what in the Brig matchup. Next up, let's talk about Kiriko. Kiriko's counters is interesting because I don't think she has a true counter. There are characters that are certainly decent against her. Characters like Sojourn are pretty good against her. Characters that, you know, can just outright kill her. But she's a very hard character to actually shut down because she has her cleanse, which pretty much deals with like everything. And then she can teleport away. So a Kiriko could be aggressive on an off angle, get some value, and then dip away. Characters that can just one-tap her out of nowhere, force her to be a little bit more reserved in the way she's playing. You know, a character like Widowmaker and Sojourn, but Kiriko has game against those characters as well. Like, if a Widowmaker is like trying to kill someone else, a Kiriko can like turn a corner and just two-tap her like right away. So I would say that the majority of matchups for Kiriko are more skill-based matchups, not really counter or no counter, although Sojourn from a power level perspective is probably the only thing that like has like legitimate consistent game up against a Kiriko. Next up, we gotta talk about Lucio. Lucio's another character that I don't think really has a true hard counter. He has good game against most characters, or he can avoid the matchup altogether, and there's a ton of characters that he doesn't ever really get in a true 1v1 with. I will say though that characters that can either cancel his beats or like kill him mid-air make him play positionally like a certain way. Like, he doesn't really want to fly through open space up against a Sojourn or a Hanzo or a Widow, but like he can play around those things, so they're not really counters. I would say like the only like true counter to him is probably like Sombruh, because she can cancel his EMP, or she can cancel his beat with EMP. Next up, we got to talk about Mercy. And Mercy is a character where she also like doesn't have any like true hard counters. She's another character kind of like Brig, where you need to think more about your composition and how you enable them. Sure, there are characters that can fight Mercy, but you know, the whole counters thing, a lot of times, especially like lists like this. Oh, by the way, I'm kind of completely blocking the list down here. Let's move myself. You know, the whole list of this is like, what if a character was locked in like a cage with another character? Who wins? It's like, that's not how counters work. Mercy is never a character that's gonna win a cage fight, right? But she can definitely play around and avoid a lot of her bad matchups if you're good enough as Mercy. If you have someone worth enabling and pocketing and like exemplifying someone on your team's value, then it could be worthwhile to play her, and even up against characters that are giving you a hard time. And you have a ton of mobility. There's a lot of advanced mobility options on Mercy. So I would say that she, again, doesn't have like a true like hard counter. It's more like a skill, like how good are the people that you're playing against, how coordinated are they, how much are they punishing your movement, how much are they coming after you, the list goes on. Next up, we got to talk about Moira, and there's a couple of characters that are pretty good against Moira. I would say that characters like D.Va could be pretty annoying because they can eat your orbs. Not really a true hard counter because you could definitely play around that if you want to, and the D.Va has to be kind of in position to do that. Characters that can play at range from you but still kill you, that you can't really do much against, you know, characters like Ashe, characters like even Soldier 76 could be kind of annoying, characters like Widow, characters like Hanzo. These characters could be annoying, but you can play around these characters. I would say that in a true 1v1 though, a lot of that is going to be skill on the enemy team side. Like, how good is the Hanzo? How good is the Cass? How good is the Sojourn? Are they going to hit their shots on you when they're under pressure? Like, if you fly at them and you're hitting them and you're dodging and weaving, how consistently, dude. I think I'm losing my brain cells making this video. Please smash that subscribe. I need them because my brain is fried. But how consistently are the people that she's fighting gonna hit their shots onto her? That is what matters a little bit more, in my opinion. And they're gonna be under pressure too. So now, last up, we gotta talk about Zenyatta. And Zenyatta's a tricky one because he definitely has a ton of counters, characters that can kill him, but he also is good against a lot of characters. Like, Discord is just a very powerful ability depending on how your team uses it. He can also 1v1 a lot of characters in the game as long as they don't get the jump on him. So I would say that he is slightly disadvantaged in a ton of dive matchups, but he can definitely overcome that with skill, and then it's not really a counter, so it's more like a skilled matchup. But anyways, I would say, like, collectively, these are what I would have you thinking about when you're thinking about counters in the game. But yeah, let me know which of these you like the most out of this list. And please smash that subscribe and join the Discord. Links will be in the description down below.